Welcome to today's Mishna Yomi. Today we find ourselves in Maseches Megillah, Parak Dalet Mishnayos of Vav through Zayin. Mishnah Vav says as follows: Katan Korei Batorah Umetargim. A child has the ability to be has the ability to be a Bal Korei, and to Korei Batorah, and umetargim. He could also be the Turgman, the translator. Aval ino poris al shma. This goes back to Mishna Hay as well, to Mishna Hay, to yesterday's Mishnah. They know poris al shma, but he can't be poris al shma. They know overlifting ateba, nor could he be the chazan. They know no says kapov. And if he's a Kohen, he is not permitted to dochen. Now, the Bartanura explains what does it mean he not permitted to dochen. A child could dochen, meaning he can't dochen on his own. So, for example, if the only Kohen in Shul is a Katan, we would not have him dochen. Of course, he could ascend with other Kohanim, but he cannot ascend on his own. So again, obviously, some of these norms have changed over time as well. The idea just is on a technical level. You see, with Kriyas HaTorah, the reason why technically a katan could be a Balkorei is, Bartanura explains on a technical level, Kriyas HaTorah, there's an obligation for everyone to hear it, but it's not like the Bal Korei is being motzi anyone, right? He's not discharging an obligation of anyone. So because he's not discharging an obligation, technically, even a child could be the Bal Korei. Pocheach, Pores Eshma Umetargim. So Pocheach is someone whose clothing is torn. The Bartanura says, Begadiv Kuruim, Uzraosav Nirami Bachutz. His clothing is torn and his arms are visible. So he is permitted to go ahead and be Pores Al Shma Umetargim. He could also be the translator. Aval Ino Kori Batorah, but he cannot be the Balkori. The Ino Overlif Neateva. He cannot be the Chazan. The Ino Nosi as Kapav, nor can he Duchin. So this is very interesting. The idea over here is that we don't want him being the Bal Korei, nor do we want him going ahead and being the Chazin, nor do we want him duchening, because his appearance is degrading. And as we're going to see, it's a lack of kavod. It's both a lack of kavod as well as a distraction. Therefore, someone with unkempt or torn clothing, he can be Poris Hashma because he has an obligation to do that as well. But he cannot go ahead and reading the Torah in torn clothing would be an issue of Kavod Torah, or a lack of Kavod Torah, lack of honor to the Torah. Leading the Tzibor, once again, there's a certain Kavod Tzibor, honor or dignity due to the congregation. And Duchenim, same idea. Suma Poris Hashma Metarkim, someone who is blind has the ability to be Poris Al Shma, and could also serve as the Turgaman, could also serve as the translator. Obviously, he can't serve as the Bal Korei, because serving as the Bal Korei requires one to actually read from the scroll. Rabbi Huda says, no, Kol Shelo Ra'a Ma'oros Miyamav Eino Poris Al Shma. Remember, Poris Al Shma means you missed the Baruch Hu, you missed the Brachos of Kriya Shema, you get a meaning together, you say Baruch Hu and you say the Brachos of Kriya Shema. Rabbi Huda says, part of the brachos of Kriya Shema is Yotzer HaMa'oros. We thank Hashem for creating the luminaries. Rabbi Huda posits that someone who has never seen the luminaries is not permitted to go ahead and be Poris Al Shema. Very interesting. Very interesting halacha. The Bartanura says, Ve'in halacha Rabbi Huda. The Bartanura says the halacha is not like Rabbi Huda, and in fact that's how he paskin, that even someone who is blind could technically serve as the Shliach Tzibor, as the Chazan as well, and certainly be Poris Al Shema. Along the same lines of things that could be distractions and therefore should not be done, Mishna Zayin says as follows: Kohen sheyesh biyadav mumin. If you have a Kohen who has blemishes on his hands, the Bartanura says, V'chein b'fanav aburaglav. This is true if he has blemishes on his face or on his feet. Lo yises kapov. He should not duchen. Now, what's interesting about this is, why shouldn't he duchen? This is an issue of distractions. People are distracted by things that look to them abnormal. So we don't want the people to be distracted and therefore not pay attention to the Kohen's brachas. And therefore, again, a Kohen who has blemishes on his hands or on his feet or on his face should not duchen. Rabbi Huda Omer, Af mishadu yadav tzvuos, isotis, upua lo yises kapov. Rabbi Huda says, even someone whose hands are stained with a blue dye or a red dye should also not go ahead and should also not duchen. Now, why not? Why not? See here, because people will just stare. Now, it's not a question of people will stare and therefore they're going to make the Kohen uncomfortable, which is true also. But the idea is people will stare and they're going to be distracted. The Bartanura says, commenting on the earlier case, ומתוך כך יבוא להסתכל ביודו, והמסתכל בכהנים כשנושאים כפיהם עיניו כהוס, מפני שהשכינה שורה בין ידיהם. So this is actually very interesting. So the Bartanura explains that it's not just the din distraction of the brachos. See, the simple pshat in the Mishnah is if the Kohen has some type of abnormality that's going to cause people to look at him, they're going to end up looking at him and not be focused on the brachos. The Bartanura says there's an additional idea. If the Kohen has some type of abnormality, people are going to stare at him. But the Bartanura says, what's the problem with people staring at him? They're going to come to look at his hands. And the Bartanura says, one is not supposed to look at the hands of the Kohanim when they are duchening. And in fact, the Gemara Maseches Chagiga explains that if you look at the hands of the Kohanim when they're duchening, the Bartanura says, Einav kehos, one's eyesight is dimmed, because the Shekhinah rests on the hands of the Kohanim. This is why we have the minhag to either look down during Birchas Kohanim, or a man who will put his house over his head during Birchas Kohanim in order not to look at the hands of the Kohanim when they are duchening. The Shekhinah is there, the divine presence is there, one should not look at the Shekhinah. So the Bartanura understands that the real issue over here is not simply a distraction, but we don't want people coming to go ahead and coming to stare at the actual hands of the Kohanim and thereby looking at the Shekhinah. It's interesting, the Bartanura says, so Rabbi Yehuda kind of builds on this a little bit. Rabbi Yehuda says, even if it's not an abnormality or a deformity, but his hands are stained with some type of dye, once again there's a staring concern. Interesting enough, the Bartanura says, he quotes over here, that if, let's say, the people in that particular locale all work in the dyeing industry, so that all of them have stained hands, it's not an abnormality. Even Rabbi Yehuda would agree we're not concerned that they're going to stare, and it would not be a problem. We'll stop over here for today. We will continue with the last two Mishnayos of Mesachas Megillah tomorrow. Wishing everyone a wonderful day.